The day I throttled that emergency engine through the crossing, siren echoing off the hills, Karen stood there, frozen on the tracks, her giant RV angled sideways like some last-ditch barricade between arrogance and destiny. I had about 15 seconds to decide if I was going to stop or just plow right through, and you know what? For once, I didn't hit the brakes for stupidity. The metal roared beneath my hands. The horn was screaming louder than any of her HOA fines ever did, and by the time she recognized who was driving, the look on her face, man, it was worth every sleepless night she'd caused. Let me back up a sec. It all started a week earlier, when I moved back into my grandfather's old property out by the foothills, right where the freight line and the emergency evacuation tracks sliced through the valley. The HOA had spread like an invasive weed since the old man's time, and its queen, Karen, ruled with a clipboard, a megaphone, and a deep hatred for anyone who didn't toe her pastel line. She introduced herself the day after I arrived, tapping a pen against my mailbox like a judge with a gavel, listing off all the ways my place was an affront to her delicate senses. Paint too faded, fence too rustic, trains at dawn disturbing her meditation. I told her the railroad had been here since the 1930s, and, by the way, I worked maintenance for the line. Her face twisted up like she'd bitten into a lemon. That night, she delivered 3 printed violation notices, not just to me, but to everyone in the neighborhood, my name underlined in red, of course. Noise pollution, unapproved vehicle parking, aesthetic disruption. I laughed, but the next morning, laughter died quick. I found her and the HOA board setting up cones and a barricade by the crossing, private access, HOA approved. I half expected it was some parody, but nope. Karen had actually tried to block a state railway crossing because she thought it interfered with her vision of neighborhood harmony. I brought out the state right-of-way documents. She snatched them, called them obsolete, and promised the board would vote to restrict access. I said, "You can't block a federal emergency route." She just stared and said, "Watch me." That's when I realized this wasn't about paint or fences. It was a contest to see who could bend reality further, her delusions or my patience. By the third day, she'd gone from notices to full-blown public humiliation, standing out every time the evacuation train passed, waving noise-free community signs like it was a protest against gravity. She even called the sheriff one night, saying I was operating heavy machinery illegally. The deputy showed up, saw my railway ID, and just sighed, telling me to give her space before she burns down the HOA office with her ego. The next morning, Karen doubled down, parking her monster RV right by the tracks, saying it was for a community event. Of course, our crew had a wildfire evacuation drill scheduled for that afternoon, using that very route. I told her to move. She said, "You can go around." I said, "You can get fined for obstruction." She actually snapped, "I am the fine." Yeah, that happened. That's when I started recording everything. Every threat, every fake vote, every Karenism. Sent it all to the Railway Safety Office. But government paperwork moves slower than HOA gossip. By the next day, Karen had chained her RV to a concrete post, her own handiwork, making it impossible for even a pickup to get through. I knew if an actual emergency hit, lives would be at risk. And wildfire season had just started. 5 days in, the valley already stank of dry pine and gasoline. A controlled burn north of town jumped containment. Dispatch called at dawn. Emergency evacuation engine needed on standby. I drove to the crossing, praying Karen had found a speck of common sense. Nope, her RV was still blocking the tracks, glitter banners fluttering, and for extra flair, a peace fair in progress. Tables, lemonade, kids painting signs about community serenity. I told her to move it. This wasn't a drill. She smirked, "You're bluffing." My radio crackled. Dispatch confirming fire had jumped the ridge. That's all I needed. I climbed into the evacuation engine, the biggest diesel beast in the valley, same one my grandfather used to run timber through those hills. As I fired her up, I could see Karen through the windshield, one hand on her hip, the other filming me with her phone. She wanted a scene? She was about to get a movie. I blasted the horn. The RV shook, people screamed, but she just stood there. I throttled forward, slow, letting her see my nameplate. The realization hit. This wasn't a contractor. This was her noisy neighbor. I leaned on the horn. The crowd scattered. Karen froze. then finally tried to unhook the chain from her RV, fumbling the keys. Smoke was already visible beyond the ridge. I yelled, "Move it now or I move it for you." She started ranting about calling the HOA president, forgetting, of course, that was her. I released the brake, engine roaring, horn blasting. The chain snapped, RV slid off, Karen screamed, and the RV ended up half in a ditch, dented but out of the way. Evacuation train rolled through. Families waved. Karen stood speechless, phone shaking in her hands. I climbed down and told her, "You just blocked an emergency evacuation. Congratulations, you're on every camera in the county." Sheriff rolled in minutes later. Karen tried to spin the story, but the footage spoke for itself. Sometimes, the only way to stop madness is to drive straight through it. By sunrise, the video was viral. 100,000 views, Karen screaming as the train rolled by, clipboard clutched like a useless shield. I figured she'd hide, maybe even apologize, but I underestimated her. By noon, sunglasses on, new clipboard in hand, she was printing flyers accusing me of reckless endangerment, claiming I used unlawful force with a locomotive. My neighbor Frank, a retired mechanic, handed me one and said, "Buddy, she's out for revenge. And this time she's dragging the board with her." Frank had seen the HOA transform from a community committee into a cult of control under Karen's thumb. He told me about the time she fined a guy for hanging laundry, another for owning a red truck that clashed with her color scheme. "Why doesn't anyone stand up to her?" I asked. "She scares people with legal jargon." Karen thrived on fear and paperwork. I knew there was only one thing that beat paperwork: proof. So I dug in. HOA budget filings, meeting minutes, the whole mess. Found thousands skimmed into a fund called the Harmony Initiative, redirected to her cousin's landscaping company. Sent it to my friend at the county office. Meanwhile, neighbors started bringing me sandwiches, coffee, and, of course, stories. Lydia, who had to repaint her mailbox 5 times. Another guy, nearly evicted over tall grass. The viral video had cracked her armor. For the first time, people saw she wasn't invincible. One night, I spotted Karen outside my fence, muttering into her phone, snapping photos for code violations. I told her to take a selfie for trespassing while she was at it. 10 minutes later, I got an official HOA notice: unauthorized vehicle use and public endangerment, for driving the evacuation engine to save the town. Olympic-level audacity. I brought the notice to town hall. The clerk recognized me, said, "You saved half the valley." He also let slip that Karen had filed several complaints against the railway, all personally signed. I asked how far she could go with this nonsense. "Not far. State owns the track. If she keeps it up, she'll get herself investigated for obstruction." That was my green light. I rallied Frank and some neighbors. We met in my garage, surrounded by old tools and half-broken fans, and I laid out the plan: expose her at the upcoming HOA meeting. Frank was skeptical. "She'll shout everyone down." Lydia added, "She rigs the vote." I just smiled. We're not arguing. We're showing them the truth, in front of the county inspector and a live stream. So we gathered evidence: scans of fines, bank transfers, doorbell cam footage of her trespassing. The deeper we dug, the uglier it got. Years of abuse, fake citations, family kickbacks. Karen plastered the neighborhood with "Safety First" posters accusing me of endangering residents. Hosted a community safety walk, dragging neighbors door to door for signatures to oust me. When she came to my place, I met her at the gate with the camera running. She froze, mask slipping just long enough for everyone to see the real Karen. Days later, the county launched an audit of the HOA's finances. That night, I found my fence slashed and a note: "You'll regret crossing me." For the first time, it wasn't just annoying. It was dangerous. By the time of the HOA meeting, tension hung heavy. The clubhouse was packed. Karen, in her beige suit and ironed hair, launched into a tirade about dangerous individuals and reckless conduct. She never said my name, but everyone knew. When she finished, I stood, thanked the board for their commitment to community standards, got some nervous laughs, then laid out the evidence: misallocated funds, fake fines, illegal board actions. I slid the proof across the table. The room went dead quiet. Karen went from smug to ashen, tried to regain control, waving her clipboard and shouting, "Not admissible." Frank called out, "He's got the receipts, Karen." The room erupted. Neighbors stood up, sharing their own stories. The dam broke. The board president finally suspended all HOA actions until the audit finished. Karen stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled. That night, I found another note. "You think this is over?" The next morning, Trader was spray painted on my fence. Karen posted online, accusing me of hacking HOA accounts, then tried to play victim, claiming government overreach. But the tide had turned. The sheriff started patrols, the county audit went public, and soon the state suspended the HOA's accounts. Kids played outside again. The sound of trains was just background, not a declaration of war. But Karen? She didn't know how to quit. Even from jail, she'd gathered loyal followers. Angry, bitter, still causing trouble. Lydia got her fence vandalized. Frank found threatening letters. It was clear Karen's brand of control had dug deep. Then came the night of the storm. A steel beam left on the tracks, nearly derailing the evacuation engine. If I hadn't been there, dozens could have died. The sheriff traced the truck used to an old HOA enforcer, Dean, still loyal to Karen. When they picked him up, he sneered. "You think you stopped her? You don't stop someone like that." His phone was full of messages. The community must be reclaimed. Karen had started a movement, and it wasn't over just because she was locked up. There were more threats. Maintenance carts sabotaged, blueprint plans for the engine marked with "cut here" over the brake line. But we stayed alert, tightened security, and when her vice president, Robert Miles, surfaced at the old warehouse with homemade devices, deputies took him down before he could finish what Karen started. Eventually, the county dissolved the HOA. The neighborhood took a long breath. For the first time, laughter sounded real again. We hung a simple plaque at the crossing, for those who kept the line clear. The only rule now? Don't block the train. When Karen was sentenced to 15 years, she didn't apologize, just muttered, "You can remove me, but you can't remove the idea." Maybe she was right. The scars are still there. Kids wave at trains now. Neighbors stop to talk instead of hiding behind hedges, but we all listen a little more closely for trouble. Still, as I sit by the tracks, boots in the gravel, I know one thing for sure. You can try to block progress, you can chain up the crossing, but life, like that engine, just keeps rolling forward. And now, it's our job to make damn sure no one ever stops it again. So let me ask you, where do you stand when order turns into obsession, when the rules get twisted, and control becomes its own kind of madness? Drop your thoughts below, because in a world full of Karens, sometimes the only way forward is straight through the barricade.